let me just say that, I certainly enjoyed coming down and sharing some ideas with you guys. In fact, whenever I get the invitation, it's like, all right, I'm always working on several different ideas and topics. And so this allows me to throw out some ideas out there and for people to go, all right, he's certainly been smoking stuff he shouldn't be smoking. So, I want you guys to feel free to, either at the end or in between, just ask any questions that you may have. And I'll try to answer them as best as I can. I want to push this off just a little bit to the side here so I don't trip on it. But anyway, so walls. Walls have been a very interesting topic of late. And I'm not necessarily talking about the wall along our southern border, even though I'll just mention a little bit on that. And so this presentation really doesn't focus on that specific topic, but it's certainly connected in some way. About a year ago, I was actually at a conference, and one of the many topics that was being discussed at this conference was warfare. And two archaeologists that I know, presented, and they were talking about how one of them, some recent LiDAR that they had found, that they had done the survey in Guatemala, that they had found all these walls, and it was obvious that these walls had to do with defensive earthworks, and that they stood as stark evidence of lots of warfare going on around 8 to 900 AD. The other colleague had also found some walls, but he worked in Belize, and the same sort of thing, warfare, and this and the other. So at the discussion period, I sort of raised my hands and I go, guys, just because you find a wall, you can't just assume warfare. I said, we need a little more rigor in the investigation here. Have you found any artifacts associated with warfare? Have you found bodies, with evidence of trauma? There's a whole range of different things that we can find that help to confirm that walls, or at least some walls, served defensive purposes. So, we had this long discussion there, and I forgot about it. Then about 6 months ago, I get this email from two colleagues. Both of them teach in Texas, one at Texas Tyler and the other one at, it's a Catholic school right in San Antonio. Anyway, Tom Gooderjohn and Jen Matthews. Did you know the one? Okay. So, and they said, hey, Jaime, we heard you, making some comments when, these guys were presenting at this conference, and we're writing a book. And the title of the book, the title of the book here was The Ties That Bind and the Walls That Divide. Would you be interested in writing the foreword to this volume, to this book? Did I just go off mic here? Can you guys still hear me? Awesome. But your mic's still going? All right. So I said, for a book, I said, let me think about this for a bit. Because the volume is proposed for publication at the University of Arizona Press. So I remember the next day, I go back to school, and this young colleague of mine who also works in Belize, he's no longer at NAU, unfortunately. He got a full-time, we had him there as a part-time, but he got a full-time job up in Canada, and he's Canadian, so he wanted to go. His wife was up there, and he was, sadly here with me at in Flagstaff. That kind of long-distance commute is really hard in any relationship. So I said, Sean, you got to go. But anyway, so, the next morning I run into Sean, and I said, guess what? Tom Gooderjohn and Jen Matthews want me to write this foreword to this book on walls and, ties that bind and all this kind of stuff. And Sean, being smart alecky, he goes, oh, why? Because you know, they found out that you're a big Pink Floyd fan. And I am. I mean, how can you not? I mean, you guys appreciate Pink Floyd. I mean, how can you not be a Pink Floyd fan? You know, pick your favorite album. You know, we all have one of those. So I said, no, Sean, I don't think they know that I'm a big Pink Floyd fan. It's because of this conference where I was being a pain in the butt to some younger colleagues. And I said, but I don't want to write a foreword. You know, I have a lot of ideas. And then he said, well, get back to them and tell them that you're willing to write a chapter instead of the foreword. And I go, that's even a lot more work than the darn foreword. But I said, tell you what, Sean, if you're willing to be my junior author, we're going to do that. So we agreed, right? So I started to do this research on walls and on Maya warfare. And, you know, what I started to find out is that back in the 1940s, 1930s, and in fact, right up to the 1960s, right, two of the leading Mayanists of that time were an American, Sylvanus Morley, who was, I think, at Harvard at the time, and Eric Thompson, an Englishman, who he had spent some time at the museum in Chicago and then with the Carnegie Institution of Washington. But nonetheless, these two guys, I mean, they were Maya archaeology. And what they said, you know, everybody sort of kowtowed, and it was, yes, you know, we agree, we buy it. Well, both of these guys had argued that the Maya were very peace-loving and that, you know, they were not into warfare and all this kind of stuff. And what was amazing about it, well, to some degree, you know, some people have suggested that these two guys were, you know, writing about warfare shortly after the war. And that, you know, to them, you know, the Maya were the antithesis of the Aztecs. Everybody knew the Aztecs just were bloodthirsty, right? They would sacrifice people just because it was a half moon or a quarter moon or whatever. But, you know, especially to Thompson, to him, right, the Maya were the scholars of Mesoamerica, right? They were the benevolent, you know, Mesoamerican civilization. Well, what was ironic about this, right? This, like I said, it continued right into the 1960s, probably more because these guys were so famous. Well, as I said, ironically, this continues on right into the 60s, in spite of the fact that there was a lot of evidence that the Maya were as warlike as any other Mesoamerican group. In fact, by that time, this American photographer had been to Chiapas, Mexico, had visited the site of Bonampak, and they found this one palace with 3 rooms. And, you know, so these, you can see doors. These are the 3 doors into the rooms. This is like if you were to cut that building in half and open it like a door, right? And I'm sure some of you guys have seen the Bonampak murals. And you can see painted all over every wall right up to the ceiling. And what is one of the main themes? Warfare. I mean, you see Maya attacking Maya. You see people getting speared. You see people getting captured. Here's some close-ups, right? You can see these guys being held by the hair, like I said, and somebody with a spear on top of them. Here's a better close-up, right? There again, look at the guy there with the spear. He's got this guy by the hair right there again. You know, it's just like the theme of warfare is so prevalent in the murals at Bonampak. And this stuff was reported on, and I think by the 1950s. So it's not like Thompson didn't know about this. All right, here again, some more close-ups of the Bonampak murals. In this section of the Bonampak murals, it shows somebody beheaded, people bleeding from the hands. This guy's begging for mercy, right? We know that several of them are going to be sacrificed. In addition to that, by the 1960s, people had worked in Campeche at the site of Becan. And at Becan, these are bridges. There was a moat encircling the center of that city. Here's, you know, added a little color there. so that it, you know, it stands out a bit more. So lots of evidence. Any of you ever been to Tulum? It's a beautiful little site, right on the coast by the Maya Riviera. I mean, my favorite beach is not the one at Cancun. It's the huge beach just to the south of Cancun. And in fact, when you go to that beach, you can see, you know, the little temple, the Castillo there. So the big beaches are right over there. Right? But a lot of people just go down from the buildings and go take a dip. Like I said, just gorgeous location. So that map of Tulum showing the walls around the city was already also known by Thompson and by other people. Again, in the 1960s, Dennis Puliston, who had just done his PhD, in fact, part of his PhD research at the University of Pennsylvania, Denny and his colleague, Donald Callender, had gone to Tikal. This is a map of Tikal. I'm certain some of you have been to Tikal. This is the downtown section of Tikal. Well, Denny was doing a survey, right, like a cross, right over the center. And just up here, he found these earthworks about that high. And he and Callender wrote this article in Expedition magazine, which is published by the University of Pennsylvania. And they talk about the defensive walls at Tikal, that Tikal built this wall, and that very likely the wall continued all around the city because Tikal was one of the dominant powers in the early classic period, and hence had lots of enemies, right? So, you know, here's a reconstruction of Tikal. And all this information was out there. In addition to that, right, even earlier, many people, like some of the Spanish priests who had participated during and shortly after the conquest of the Yucatan, had written about Maya warfare and some of the things that they do, and that their use of defensive barricades or a palisade, I think, in this case here, right? Bishop Landa, who's right there, had written about it in the translation by Tauser from Harvard University. You can get the English translation and you can read about all this kind of stuff. So eventually, the Mayanist who studied warfare more than anybody else was this guy, David Webster. David Webster was a professor at Penn State University, but he also did, I think, I can't remember if he did his PhD at the University of Pennsylvania or at Harvard. But anyway, some years ago, a whole bunch of us went to Cambodia. Well, just a small group of us, including Michael Coe, who just passed a few months ago. And there's yours truly, my colleague Lisa Lucero, who works in Belize, Susan Toby Evans, and David Webster, husband and wife. David just retired from Penn State. But David, like I said, has written more about Maya warfare than anybody else. He worked at Bekan. He worked all over the Maya world. And one of the things that happened after the 60s is that everybody then started to go after Thompson and Morley and said, guys, you got it all wrong. The Maya were very warlike. They attacked each other. They captured each other. They sacrificed each other. They were not, right, these holy scholars that you assume them to be. Well, the pendulum swung almost 180 degrees. And everybody, like these colleagues at that meeting where I was, and it's like they found anything remotely resembling a wall. It was warfare, right? Thank you, goodbye. I don't need to be rigorous in my study or my analysis of it. And I was like, this bothers me too much. In fact, this is again from David Webster. He goes, some minus and so far, this is even small communities, agricultural fields, water reservoirs, everything was defended. And I was like, I agree with David Webster. This is going too far. I've worked at a lot of Maya cities, and I haven't found this kind of stuff, right? Well, some of the folks working in the Petesh Batun region of Guatemala had been arguing for this, Now, they had some good evidence of warfare there. And so I decided, let me do a survey. Let me go around the Maya world and see what we have. So, in the Petesh Batun, that circled area that I just showed you, right, Arthur Demers and some of his students had excavated there, and they said, right, this site known as Dos Pilas was thriving, right, just before, in the early 700s. And then eventually, they started to rip walls off buildings, and they built a double-walled area around the city. The one problem with that is that dating these walls, they're ripping stones from buildings, is really hard. How long after? Was it when the city was already abandoned? Or was it during the time when the city was still going strong? And that has been one of the questions. Regardless of that, lots of sites are also found in defensive locations. There's no question about it. Look at this site of Aguateca. There's a big escarpment, and there's a chasm. So it is not easy to attack a site like that, right? And you'd have to cross over, and this is a beautiful rendition by National Geographic to show, right, this warfare that these guys were arguing for. Here's one of the walls that they found right over an earlier building. And this one earlier building had stairs with hieroglyphics. It's a hieroglyphic stairway, which is really awesome discovery. Just some more pictures of that. They also found on this little peninsula sticking into the lake, Lake Petesh Batun, that the Maya had cut these sections to create almost like moats, right, for defensive purposes. More recently, even outside of the Maya area, I don't know if any of you have been to the site of Cacaxtla in Tlaxcala. They found these amazing murals. See the guys there? These are all murals, beautiful painted murals. And the subject, warfare. Gord, have you guys been? Yeah. Aren't they awesome? Yeah. I mean, and in multiple colors, just really beautiful. So, there's no question that the Maya practiced warfare, that they built defensive earthworks, in some cases moats, in some cases walls, right? Palisades, from the historic information. No question about that. But are all walls for defensive purposes? And should we just drop, scientific rigor and just assume that all walls are the same? So I decided to test this and to start looking for other types of walls. In fact, Robert Scherer, who died also a couple of years ago, he wrote this, if you want the Bible on the Maya, buy the Scherer and Traxler volume. It is just really detailed. It's an awesome, awesome book. But, he was saying, he also had issues. He had taken issues about this, and he said, look, there are lots of Maya sites, and Maya civilization was evolving for hundreds of years before this late period, and many of them don't have walls. So, yes, they practice warfare, but we can't just assume that everything is military. So, I decided to look first up in the Yucatan. I'm from Belize, and Belize is down here off the screen. And I decided to look first at this site called Chunchuk Mill, because another archaeologist had worked there and found walls, and he goes, defensive earthworks all over the place, even fields, even this, everything was, enclosed by walls to protect them. This is a map of that site. The orange are all walls. And look at that. In French, you would say it includes a load of walls, right? All over the place. Well, here you can see, this is a reconstruction by some other folks who have worked there more recently. Right away, when you look at this, that's not defensive. It's a sakbe. It's a roadway. And we know that the longest road in the Maya world, joined several cities. In fact, the longest one is about 100 kilometers between Yashuna and Koba. And I just included that one. All these sites, Uxmal has a road to Kaba, to Labna, to Sail. These cities are all interconnected with incredible network of roads. So some of these are called andadores. If you speak Espanol, andar means to go for a walk, right? So andadores are walkways. In Maya, sacbeob, plural, or sacbe, white roads, because I guess they were plastered and they were white. So here again, you can see this is an actual photo of one of these sort of walkways. But you know, people are going, oh, look, it's a double defensive wall. So eventually, right, other people suggested no, and that a lot of the walls around, you know, each of the little house mound groups, that they're also, there's a Spanish word for them. And we'll come to that in a little bit. Any of you ever been to Uxmal? One of my favorite Maya cities. Some people like Chichen Itza more. I just love Puc-style architecture. And you find some Puc-style architecture at Chichen, especially the old part of Chichen. But the Puc architecture at Uxmal, Kaba, Sail, Labna, oh, mwah, you got it. If you haven't been there, you got to do it. And I do not work for the Mexican tourism industry. Just, you know, if anything, you know, I did work for the Belize Ministry of Tourism many years ago. But anyway, Uxmal, right? Awesome site. This is the Temple of the Magician at Uxmal. There's another view of the Temple of the Magician. And if you walk this way, you end up at the Nunnery. And here's the Nunnery with some of the big buildings. It's a palace complex. And then you go through that building, and then you go south, and you get to the Palace of the Governors. Massive, massive building, and beautifully decorated and all that kind of stuff. But let's go back to Uxmal. Uxmal also has, you notice this here? It's a wall. But right away you notice that it's a what? Discontinuous wall. And the first people to work at Uxmal, guess what they said about that wall? Defensive earthworks, right? That's for defense. Later on, people said, if it was defensive, why is it so discontinuous? It was to manage or control the flow of traffic into the city. And many cities have those kinds of walls, right? Where you can direct how you want traffic. We use them today. Go to Washington, D.C., and there are all kinds of walls to direct the flow of traffic, both pedestrian and non-pedestrian flow of traffic, right? Mayapan. Mayapan is one of the last Maya cities, ancient Maya cities before the arrival of the Spanish. And in fact, when Chichen Itza goes down, Mayapan rises as the main dominant city in the Yucatan. And, you know, this is just one big aerial view, and this is a modern community there, modern road. But it has a wall around it. But each household around, look at all these. Right? These are all, and usually they're around these buildings or household groups. Some of them are completely encircling and some of them don't. Right? Here's one, and it has the access in there. Right? These walls are called albaradas in the Yucatan. And albaradas do not mean defensive earthworks. Albaradas really define property walls or household enclosures. Right? And like I said, they're all over the Yucatan. Right? You drive anywhere you go, you'll see them. And they start off usually either, you see how it connects to the house and it goes that way, connects there. And it's a family compound. But it was never meant for defense. It is demarcating property or household, right, membership or people who live in that area. Yeah, you know. So that's the Yucatan. So then I said, all right, I better go home now. So I headed south from the Yucatan and went to Belize. And I do most of my research in Western Belize. And over the years, we had found, right, several sites with walls. So Western Belize, and I think I've said to some of you guys, the reason why I still work there, or the reason why I mostly worked there was when my mom was still alive, I could go home and get pampered. And my mom would always look at me and go, "Oh my God, are you not eating?" And I'd like to say, "Hey, Mom, I'm in good shape. I've been playing soccer, and pulling my hamstring and all that kind of stuff." And she would just want to feed me the whole time. So my hometown is San Ignacio, which includes all of Cajalpech. But I've been working at Cajalpech, Shenantonich, all these sites around here for the last some years. So Cajalpech, here's a little plan. Well, when we were excavating over in this section, we found a wall that came off this building like that, and it went right in between. This is one of the ball courts. The wall went right in the middle there to there. And it reminded me of one of those walls that one of those guys in that conference where I was going, "Look, evidence of defense." And I was like, "Thank you, I don't think so." So if we were to go from over here and look across, in fact, I took that photo from the top there, looking across, this is what you'd see. Here's the two ball courts, and I'm standing on top of one of the ball courts. I may have climbed the tree, in fact. And you can see the wall that I'm talking about right there, and it continues right to the back. There's a cut there, but when I conserved it, I left that cut open so that tourists could walk through. And if anyone was a special need, they didn't have to try to get over that wall. So I did that. Well, we know that a lot of stuff was happening in here towards after the site had been abandoned. It looks like some people came back, and they're reusing stones from some of the buildings and doing other stuff like that. They're moving altars from their original location and bringing it over in that area. Here again, you can see when we were excavating, right, the wall, and that's after we conserved it. What was interesting too, there are 3 small cuts, or 2, for drainage. But that was as high as the walls were. That's the section that I cut open for visitors to go through. The green, that's how that wall went. Now, if you wanted to defend, a section of the site, why just build that little section of wall? Sure, you could maybe put some palisades, but we excavated all over to see if we found any post holes. None. Right? None. Another, Sean Morton, who I convinced to do this paper with me, he had worked at this site called Tipanchenhuitz in western Belize. And he found walls in some of the most weird places. Right? This one is just a closed off access that way. And he said, "I'm really glad that you brought this up, because at first I thought defensive, but then if it was defensive walls, these guys were not with it." Right? It just didn't make sense the way they're building some of these walls. I told you I work at Shenantonich, and this is a LiDAR image of Shenantonich. Any of you been to Shenantonich? I think, yeah, some of you folks. So you will remember this is the downtown part of the city. This huge building here is called the Castillo. Here, there's the Castillo, and that's what it looks like. I've spent many years here. I've excavated and conserved all this stuff. I've excavated and conserved that. This is an older picture, done the freeze. So if we were to stand up here or there and look this way, so we're on top of the Castillo, we're looking that way, that's the view we would get. I can tell you that over the last 5 years, I've excavated all these and conserved them. I've been doing conservation work there. I excavated, conserved one of the ball courts there. We've been doing a lot of work in the last 5 years at Shenantonich. Well, when I was excavating the front of this building here, before I go there, so this is the big plaza. We call this courtyard A1, courtyard A2, courtyard A3. So when we were excavating the base of this building here, I took a photograph from up top here looking down, and then another one from up there. So the first photograph, right, we're cleaning off. Look at this feature here. It's a wall. So I took that picture from there looking this way. Well, if I come up on top of this building and I look, there's that wall. This is the same photograph I just zoomed in, right? See the wall right there, two sides. And the wall, you can see it continues. It goes right over to there. We know that this wall is built, again, just like at Calpech, from stones that people, after the site is being abandoned, some folks are hanging on. They're staying up there. They don't want to leave. And they're ripping stones off from earlier buildings and reusing them. And we now know that they decided to live in this courtyard because we have all kinds of platforms. Right? So there's where that wall. See, these are all platforms, and we've excavated all here. It's like they're ripping stones from the face of these buildings and reusing them. And they block off access there. I have excavated this access, no wall. I excavated that access, no wall. I had one of my NAU students do all this for his MA thesis, right? Always get your students to do the stuff that, and no wall. But he also excavated. We found platforms, in here. It's almost like the last hurrah where people, right, the site's falling apart, people are abandoning. They don't have others to go and cut stones and build big buildings for them, but they don't want to leave. So they're enclosing there. And there's the map again, and there's where that wall was. But no wall there, no wall here, no wall there. Defensive? I think it's more like those albaradas that we saw in the Yucatan, right? Look at this other one. Same thing. When the site's being abandoned, they build this wall right here, and they build these two long platforms. People are living here, but this is where the ancestors used to live, right? And so they keep that connect. Another site. This is the LiDAR for a site that we call Lower Barton Creek. Here's the site center, and look at this feature right there. Another one of my grad students did a study of this site for his MA at NAU. We're one of the few universities that MA students have access to LiDAR data and incorporating it in their research, so we like to brag about that, right? So if we were to map this a little palace complex, a ball court, a little temple pyramid there, another temple, another big courtyard, and look at this wall. And I remember when Van, who now is doing his PhD at Brandeis University, when we were out there, Van said, "What the hell is this wall?" And I said, "Do you think it's defensive?" And he goes, "It doesn't make sense. If it was defensive, you'd think that it would encircle the entire, downtown part of the city." So here I should have continued this right up to there. And then Van and I are sitting down one day. This is before I even thought about doing this, this paper, which I'm still working on and I'm going to submit, right, for this book that my friends are doing. And I said, "Van, I think I got it figured out. They're using this wall to direct the flow of traffic into the city because, look, there are buildings up there on every hilltop. We have buildings, 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 buildings. But this is both the commercial as well as the ceremonial center of this ancient city. And whenever there are public events, right, people from the hinterland come into the city, whether for market day. I'm sure some of you guys have been to a market day in Flag, right? And where is it that the market is held? Downtown. And everyone sort of gravitates to that area. So I said, I bet you they're using it to channel traffic right around here through the ball court, which is a lot of entrances to Maya cities. You go through the ball court. And then this is the Great Plaza. You have your market, and then during market time, any of you ever been to Chichicastenango in Highland, Guatemala for the market day? You notice where's the market? Right by the cathedrals. And during market day, what do a lot of people do? They go up to the temples, they burn incense, right? Some of them are kneeling there, they buy flowers, and they leave it there for, for offerings. So I said, I bet you it's to manage the flow of traffic into the city. This is one of the royal palaces. It's elevated. You're not allowed to go there, right? Unless you have special invitation. So you'd go through here, through the ball court, and then up there's some stairs there into the Great Plaza. So there, that wall is not defensive. It is directing the flow of traffic. You know, one of the things that I found, I've done some, and I didn't put any slides here, but I've worked in a lot of caves. In fact, I did a couple presentations on caves. And they're building walls in these caves. Sometimes, if there's a big room, they will block off. They'll build part of a wall here, and then a doorway there. And it's almost like the curtains in a play. What happens behind the, not everything that happens behind the curtains is for public viewing, right? But it's also to create spaces. We do that in our house. What is the most walled part of our home? The bedroom. Because our houses have public space where your friends can come in, and then private space. So we sometimes use walls to demarcate spaces, right? So again, not necessarily for defense. I've worked at Caracol. Some of you may have been to Caracol, and you've been, this is Cana, a huge structure, about 150 feet tall. I had the incredible privilege of doing a lot of excavations and conserving it. There are a couple people there to give you a sense of size. And there it is again. Well, I was looking, you know, when I started this study, I started to look at all this LiDAR data that I have to look for walls. And I found one, right? This is the modern road coming in today to the site. These are ancient Maya roads. And there's another one going right there. These lines are all agricultural terraces. Every hilltop has prehistoric buildings, every darn hilltop. But this is downtown. Big reservoir, little reservoir, smaller reservoir, right? So lots of stuff like that. Well, I was looking at this, and then I realized, look at this. There's a wall, and then the wall used to go like this. Barely see it there. But the modern road cut through the wall. When they were putting in that road, they didn't even know they went through that wall. So if I draw it, and I remember looking at this, and I went to my colleague, Arlen Chase, who works at Caracol. I said, Arlen, you think this wall is for defense? And he goes, well, if it was, they really didn't plan it very well, because you can still come into the city down the main roads and go after, you know, folks in the palaces all over the place. So what the hell is this wall? Again, is it to contain, right, people, or is this served as a market area? I don't know the answer. You know, I don't know what that wall served, but defense, it did not, right? It may have served some other purpose. Remember I showed you an image of Tikal where in the 60s, Dennis Puliston and his buddy Callender had done this research. David Webster, Mr. Maya Warfare, decided to go back there. And they just did a whole bunch of LiDAR for that. And what David Webster found is that this wall is not continuous. At the time when Puliston and Callender wrote it, they suggested, they had only done the survey for that, they suggested that it probably encircled the whole city. So Dave Webster did like I do. He took a bunch of his students from Penn State and said, son, here's a machete. Go out in the jungle and you gotta go looking for walls, right? And you know, these poor guys, of course, they had a lot of local workers with them, so they go out there looking for these defensive walls. And here's what David Webster, in his article that he published in 2007, concluded. Right? It's a will o' the wisp. Right. So, you know, again, you know, we need to spend some more time, you know, about looking at walls, right? And I found this little cartoon. I really loved it, right? You know, and so we have a problem. This guy doesn't just want, in other words, these walls are not, you know, were not built for the same purposes. So I decided, great, I've looked all over the Maya world. Let's go elsewhere. And I've been to China and Taiwan a couple of times. I I will get to the Great Wall one of these days. I haven't been there yet, but it's in my bucket list, and hopefully the whole coronavirus thing, will eventually be addressed. The last twice I've been invited by the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences to go there for this big conference. It's been really awesome. But when we think of walls, I'm sure almost everyone hears the word walls, and what's the biggest wall in the world? The Great Wall. Right? In fact, there's a lot of stuff we know about the Great Wall. Some of it is not true. For instance, people said it's one of the only human-made features that you can see from outer space. It's a load of crap. It's not true. It's false. But we know that it goes for miles, right? More than 1,000 miles of wall. Well, here's another fallacy. In fact, I think, we know that I think the Shang dynasty or one of them, or the Ming dynasty, they would go around in the countryside and collect a lot of these men and take them out there because they were going to be the line of defense against the Mongols to the north. Well, these guys were isolated. Guess what a lot of them did? They decided, screw this, we're going to go join the Mongols. And many of them did, right? They were out there for years, and they just started to mix with the Mongols to the north, so they abandoned their location. But here, some amazing assumptions about the Great Wall. It's about 20,000 kilometers. It started to be built by the Ming dynasty as a defensive barricade to keep the northern barbarians, right, Genghis Khan, and the Mongols out of China. But it actually consists of a whole bunch of discontinuous. It's not continuous. A lot of people think that it starts and there's no break in it. False. It was built by several different dynasties, and eventually, did it serve its purpose? No, the Mongols still came in and took over China, and they took over much of Asia, right? This guy Callahan, who has written about it, I found this really interesting. He said that the Great Wall provides us with how the significance of it has changed over time, right? A century ago, the Great Wall was understood in China as a monument to the wastefulness of tyrannical emperors, because they took these poor peasants from the countryside and forced them to go there and to build this massive, massive wall, which eventually didn't serve its intended purpose. More recently, right, in the 21st century, the wall is now taken for granted that it stands as a symbol of peace that benefits humanity. It's almost like the whole concept of Zen Buddhism, right? But today, it's also a national symbol of identity for China, right? It's certainly not thought of as a defensive barricade, right? It has become very symbolic of China. I'm sure most of you guys, or a lot of you guys, have been to Berlin, right? Awesome. It's one of those places that you have to go. In fact, I decided I had to go see the Berlin Wall when I was a student doing my PhD in the city of London. I did my PhD at the University of London. And I was in London between 1988 and 1992. And you guys know what happened during that time, right? In 1989 was when the Berlin Wall came down. And I remember I was typing away, working on my PhD thesis, and listening to the radio when I heard the announcement. I go, holy hell. I just stopped, right? The Berlin Wall had been known for many years by everybody, and that it actually came down, right? Beyond everybody's wildest dreams. So here, this is the East and this is the West. And the West started using it for graffiti and art and all kinds of other things. Again, you can see, right, some of the graffiti and all that kind of stuff. Well, here are some facts about the Berlin Wall. We know that it extended for about 100 miles, and that it was about 12 feet high. And by the way, it wasn't always concrete. It started off first like a fence. And people were still cutting through and escaping to the west. And then they made it a little sturdier, and then they changed it, and then eventually it ended up being what we remember the Berlin Wall as being. So it evolved. Right? It separated East and West Germany until it finally came down in November of 1989. East Germans perceived the wall as a tangible separation between its remember the Cold War? Where, you know, the communists were saying, hey, we're the best way that society should live. And of course, we over in the West was like, sorry, you know, thanks for playing, but we don't agree with you, right? But this was what, right, was the dogma and the propaganda that was espoused by, you know, communists on the other side. Others perceived the wall as a symbolic boundary between democracy, which was good, and communism, which was evil. Was the Berlin Wall defensive? It was ideological. It separated two very defined and distinct ideologies: communism on one side and democracy. And depending on which side you were, good from evil. The communists thought that they were good and we were the evil ones. And we thought we were the good ones and they're the evil ones. But that wall was ideological. Defensive? Not in any way. You can shoot missiles over that. Hell, you can throw rocks over it. You know? So, not defensive at all. And it came down. Like I said, I I remember going downtown the next day and I bought, gosh, I think it was the Sunday, one of the newspapers in London, the Illustrated London News, I think it was, and it had images of it. I still have it at home. I've kept that, you know, that publication because it was so awesome. All of us here are old enough that we remember the whole Iron Curtain. This was an invisible wall to a large degree, right? It separated, right, parts of Eastern Europe that had been taken over by Russia and Western Europe. And some countries, right, remained neutral, right? Like Switzerland and Switzerland and I think Austria and a couple other places. Southern Ireland, the country of Ireland, Sweden, Finland, etc. But that was also a sort of construct, an ideological wall that had the same things with the Berlin Wall. And there were all kinds of cartoons produced during the 50s, the 60s, and right up into the 70s, right up to the coming of the collapse of of that wall, of the Iron Curtain. And we can also define it, right? And yes, there were troops along those, that imaginary wall. Again, I'm sure many of you guys have been to, we're almost done, many of you guys have been to Jerusalem. There's the Wailing Wall, right? In Hebrew, I don't know if I'll pronounce this right, but HaKotel HaMa'aravi, or something like that. It's the Wailing Wall. Well, it's the only part of the wall of the temple of Jerusalem that was destroyed by the Romans. That wall is symbolic and sacred, right? People go there to pray, to try to connect with their past. It's not defensive. The oldest known wall is the walls of Jericho. And if you read the Old Testament, right, remember, during one of the battles between, I think, the Hebrews and the Jacobite, I can't remember what, the trumpets, and they were blaring the trumpets, etc., that made the walls come down. Archaeologists working at the walls of Jericho suggest that actually that wall was not defensive, that it was likely ritual, right? And that it was built to align with this mountain, and when the sun was either setting, it sort of aligned with some of these walls. Now let's come back home. How many of you guys come from New England? There's a couple. So one of my first teaching jobs that I got in America was at the University of New Hampshire. And I love New England, right? Except when the winter becomes 7 months long. But it's gorgeous. You know, I still love New England. There are lots of walls all over New England. You know, take a drive through Massachusetts or Maine or New Hampshire, and it's just idyllic for miles and miles and miles and miles. They've also done LiDAR survey of most of New England. In fact, a lot of the states in America have commissioned, you know, their surveyors to do LiDAR. The entire state of North Carolina has been LiDAR surveyed, to give you an example. This is a LiDAR image of New England. Look at all the walls. That's the beauty of LiDAR, right? I didn't have to go and walk all every darn fence line. How are these walls built? Farmers, the rocky terrain because of the glaciers when they moved, right, back and forth. So to be able to plow or to really farm it, they gather the rocks and they just line them up along their property line. And today, when you look at it, you would think, oh man, state control. People had to come in here and build all these. No, it was gradual. Little by little, they built these walls. So what we've noticed so far is that some walls were constructed for defensive purposes, no question. Some of them were built because they're religious, some to manage the traffic or the flow of either pedestrian traffic or others. Right? Some are symbolic, some divide ideologies. They're not all militaristic. And if we were to look at the wall on our southern border, right, is it militaristic? No. Does it stop illegal immigrants from coming? It stops some. It stops the poorer ones. But if you're in Central America and you can afford to pay to apply for your visa, and you get your visa and then you buy a ticket, you fly into Phoenix or LA or to Miami, and you stay. You don't go back, right? Or you build tunnels under it. Does it keep the drugs out? And you know, the drug traffickers are getting more savvy. I was reading some stuff when I was doing some of this research, and I saw these little small submarines. I don't know if any of you guys have seen that. Yeah. They have been buying these small submarines, and they load them up with cocaine and just enough space for the guy who's driving the submarine, and they come over into U.S. territorial waters, pop up at night, and get all the drugs out. So really, you know, I think if we were to look at it, like I said, this was not the focus of my talk, but if we look at that wall, right, it's not defensive, is it ideological? Does it separate us from them? You know, because most walls do that, right? Or it defines our property or our area from others. So walls then, right? So I, of course, being a Pink Floyd fan, I had to pull in a couple lines from the album, The Wall. So, you know, when you find a wall, don't go banging your head against this wall because it could have different significance. Right? Walls were not created equally. Many walls around, and they can have a whole multiple, or a whole different number of functions. Thank you.